A saleswoman ignored an elderly woman in a designer store, judging her by her appearance. But the next day, the same woman returned, not as a customer, but as the new owner of the store. What happened next was a true twist that you need to see. Margaret Johnson, a 68-year-old woman with a serene presence and a gaze that carried the wisdom of decades well-lived, opened the glass door of the elegant boutique, La Mode, on the famous Fifth Avenue in New York City. The bell above the entrance chimed softly, announcing her arrival. She wore a simple-cut beige coat and brown skirt ensemble, accompanied by a short-brimmed hat that was her signature at special events. Her brown leather bag, although visibly worn by time, was polished and carried the same timeless character as its owner. Margaret, a retired businesswoman who had built an empire of natural cosmetics over 40 years, possessed a fortune that few could even imagine. However, for her, discretion was more valuable than any display of wealth. Her life philosophy, based on authenticity and hard work, was reflected in her way of dressing and carrying herself. Entering luxury stores was not something she did often, but her granddaughter's wedding deserved a special occasion. As soon as Margaret stepped into the bright and sophisticated space of the store, she felt the staff's gazes fall upon her. The lead salesperson, Emily, a young and elegant woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, assessed Margaret from head to toe with a discreet yet judgmental look. Accustomed to dealing with glamorous clientele, Emily quickly assumed that Margaret was not the type of customer the store would want to serve. "Good afternoon," Margaret said with a polite smile, looking around and admiring the carefully displayed dresses on tall mannequins. She approached Emily, who was organizing hangers with an efficiency that seemed overly studied. "Yes," Emily replied without even looking up, continuing to fuss with the dresses as if the time she spent on Margaret was a huge favor. Before Margaret could explain what she was looking for, a young woman in her 20s entered the store, wearing a designer coat that made her social status clear. Emily immediately brightened her face with a rehearsed smile and abandoned Margaret without hesitation. "Welcome to La Mode. How can I help you?" Emily said to the new customer, leaving Margaret aside as if she were invisible. Margaret observed the scene without losing her composure. Her eyes displayed the same calm that had allowed her to overcome many challenges in her life. She was not the type to be easily discouraged, but the evident disregard still bothered her, even after so many years of achievements and overcoming obstacles. Slowly walking to a mannequin showcasing a dark blue dress made of shiny fabric, she lightly touched the material with her fingers, assessing the texture and elegance of the piece. Meanwhile, Emily continued to focus on the young customer, offering options with disproportionate attention, deliberately ignoring Margaret's presence. The attitude was so blatant that another salesperson, a bit younger and visibly less experienced, glanced in Margaret's direction, seeming uncertain about what to do. Despite the tense atmosphere, Margaret remained steadfast. She knew what she wanted, a dress that not only symbolized the importance of her granddaughter's wedding, but also represented the story she had built with so much effort. "Excuse me," Margaret said in a firm yet polite tone, addressing Emily again. The salesperson hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether to pay attention to this seemingly simple woman. Margaret continued without waiting for a response. "I would like to try on that dark blue dress." Margaret, with her characteristic patience, tried once again to get Emily's attention. She approached the saleswoman, who remained focused on attending to a well-dressed young customer. "Excuse me," Margaret said in a calm but firm tone, pointing to the dark blue dress she had admired on the mannequin. Emily, still bent over a display, paused for a moment, lifted her eyes with visible impatience, and gave Margaret a look that was a mix of disdain and fatigue. "I don't know if we have anything for you here," Emily murmured, her voice so low it was almost a whisper, but laden with contempt. She then turned abruptly, as if the time spent with Margaret was an annoyance. As she walked away, she exchanged a knowing glance with her colleague Lisa, an equally elegant and superior-looking saleswoman. The two shared a discreet but clearly malicious laugh. Emily commented, without bothering to lower her voice much, "Some people just come in here to look. They never buy anything, but they waste our time." Margaret heard the words clearly, but chose to maintain her dignity. Her expression remained unshaken, even though inside she felt a mix of sadness and indignation. This was not the first time she had faced prejudice, but the fact that it still happened even after all she had achieved, still hurt. She took a deep breath and decided not to let Emily's attitude stop her from finding the perfect dress for her granddaughter's wedding. Determined, Margaret shifted her gaze from Emily and spotted another employee in the opposite corner of the store. It was Sophie, a young saleswoman with brown hair tied in a casual bun and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Sophie was organizing a display of accessories when she realized what was happening. With an encouraging smile, she approached Margaret, ignoring Emily's disapproving look. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Sophie asked, with a soft and welcoming voice that immediately conveyed empathy. Margaret turned to her, feeling a sudden relief. "Yes, please," she replied, with a slight smile that was a mix of gratitude and relief. "I'm looking for an elegant dress for my granddaughter's wedding. I like that dark blue one, but maybe you can show me other options." Sophie cast a quick glance at Emily and Lisa, who were still whispering and laughing, clearly oblivious to the impact of their actions. "I apologize for my colleague's attitude," Sophie said sincerely. "That's not how we treat our customers. I will do my best to help you find the perfect dress." She guided Margaret to a more private area of the store, where the haute couture dresses were displayed. Sophie began to show options carefully, describing each piece in detail that made it clear her knowledge and respect for the work they represented. "This one has a classic cut and is great for formal events. You might also like this embroidery in silver tones. It has a subtle shine, but it's very sophisticated," she explained while separating the dresses. Margaret, finally feeling welcomed, began to relax. She listened to Sophie's suggestions attentively, touching the fabrics and evaluating each detail with the same care she had always dedicated to her own life choices. Sophie, in turn, seemed genuinely committed to helping, offering honest opinions and suggestions that reflected a genuine effort to understand Margaret's style and personality. As she tried on the dresses in the fitting room, Margaret heard muffled laughter coming from the main area of the store. She didn't need to see to know it was Emily and Lisa. For a moment, she considered leaving the store, but then she looked at her reflection in the mirror. The dark blue dress fit her perfectly, highlighting her natural elegance and the presence that had always accompanied her, regardless of how others saw her. She smiled at herself, feeling empowered. After all, it was not others' judgment that defined her worth. When she stepped out of the fitting room, Sophie greeted her with a radiant smile. "It looks wonderful, Mrs. Johnson," she said, genuinely excited. "This dress really suits the occasion and you." Margaret nodded, looking at herself in the mirror one last time. "I think this is exactly what I needed," she replied, grateful to have found, amidst the disregard and prejudice, someone willing to treat her with the dignity she deserved. Margaret, dressed in the stunning dark blue dress that Sophie had suggested, took one last turn in front of the fitting room mirror. The satin fabric flowed gracefully, and the deep shade of blue beautifully complemented her skin. It was the perfect choice, exactly what she had envisioned for her granddaughter's wedding. Sophie, standing beside her, smiled with genuine enthusiasm. "This dress looks like it was made for you," Sophie said, gently adjusting the hem of the dress. "It enhances your elegance and is absolutely ideal for the occasion. I'm sure your granddaughter will love it." Margaret looked at herself for a moment, pondering. Her reflection was the image of a strong and confident woman, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel proud of herself. "I agree," Margaret replied with a subtle smile. "This will be the dress. It's exactly what I wanted." Sophie nodded excitedly and began to gather the tags and necessary accessories to finalize the purchase. Margaret walked to the counter with determined steps, ready to complete the experience and leave that environment with the dignity she always carried. But before Sophie could ring up the dress, Emily suddenly appeared. Her expression was one of impatience, as if she needed to intervene in something she considered a waste of time. She looked at the dress in Sophie's hands and then at Margaret, with the same top-to-bottom gaze she had displayed before. Her mouth curved into a cold, almost imperceptible smile as she spoke. "Maybe you should consider something more affordable," Emily said, not hiding the disdain in her voice. "We have a discount section at the back of the store. It might be more appropriate." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Emily's words, laden with prejudice and judgment, echoed in the silence of the store. Margaret felt a pang of indignation and hurt, but she did not let it show on her face. She simply lifted her chin slightly, maintaining the firm and dignified posture that had always characterized her. Sophie, visibly uncomfortable, opened her mouth to say something, but Margaret interrupted her with a gentle gesture of her hand. "Thank you very much for your help, Sophie. You have been extremely kind," Margaret said, her voice calm but firm. She then turned to Emily and stared at her for a brief moment, without saying a word. Her gaze was enough to convey her strength and disapproval. Margaret then walked towards the store exit with calm, unhurried steps, as if Emily's attitude could not shake her determination. As she passed through the door, she heard Emily and Lisa's muffled laughter once again. "I told you she wouldn't buy anything," Lisa commented mockingly. "These people love to pretend they can afford things." The cruel and prejudiced words reached Margaret's ears like distant echoes. She did not look back. Instead, she walked onto the bustling sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, where life continued to pulse with its chaotic energy. Margaret took a deep breath and felt the cold city air on her face. Even with the bitter taste of the experience, she knew that it was not what defined her. She was Margaret Johnson, a woman who had built her own empire with effort and resilience, and no petty attitude could take that away from her. The next morning, the LeMode store was operating as usual. The atmosphere was filled with the soft sound of instrumental music, the shine of immaculate display windows, and the movement of customers, some admiring luxurious dresses while others tried on shoes and accessories. Emily, as always, was stationed at the main counter, adjusting price tags on newly arrived items, while Lisa flipped through a fashion magazine, disguising her lack of interest in the few customers circulating the place. It was then that the store's door opened again, and the bell announced the entrance of a figure that instantly drew everyone's attention. Margaret Johnson crossed the threshold with firm steps and a presence that was impossible to ignore. This time, there was nothing discreet about her appearance. She wore an immaculate white suit, adorned with subtle golden details, a pearl necklace that sparkled under the store lights, and high-heeled shoes that echoed confidently on the marble floor. In her right hand, she held an elegant black leather briefcase, and beside her were two impeccably dressed lawyers and her personal assistant, a young man with a professional posture and a serious expression. Emily froze for a moment, her hands pausing over the hangers. She recognized Margaret immediately, but the sight of the new figure, with her imposing appearance and the presence of the lawyers, left her visibly uncomfortable. Lisa, who had been absorbed in the magazine until then, looked up and let out a slight gasp. The two exchanged anxious glances, unsure of how to proceed. Margaret walked through the hall as if the space belonged to her, and in a way, it now did. She stopped in the center of the hall, near a large display of evening gowns, and turned to Sophie, who was assisting a customer. "Sophie, could you please gather all the staff here in the main hall?" Margaret asked, her voice calm, but with an unquestionable authority. Sophie looked at her, surprised, but quickly nodded, realizing that something important was about to happen. In a few minutes, all the store employees were gathered, forming a semicircle around Margaret. Emily and Lisa stood slightly behind the others, trying to hide their nervousness. The tension in the air was palpable. Margaret, with a subtle smile, observed each face for a moment, allowing curiosity and unease to build. "Good morning," Margaret began, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "I believe some of you already know me. My name is Margaret Johnson." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. Emily and Lisa exchanged glances, and the apprehension on their faces was evident. Margaret continued, "Yesterday, I was in this store as an ordinary customer. I had the opportunity to observe how customers are treated, how you handle the people who walk through these doors. And, frankly, I was not satisfied." Her voice was serene, but there was an underlying firmness that no one dared to interrupt. She stepped forward, her gaze landing directly on Emily and Lisa. "There were moments when I was ignored, disrespected, and even unfairly judged for my appearance. This, my dear ones, is not just unacceptable. It is intolerable." Emily tried to open her mouth to say something, but Margaret raised her hand gently yet authoritatively, silencing her immediately. "Now, I imagine you are wondering why I am here again. Let me explain." Margaret opened the briefcase she was holding and took out a document. The lawyers beside her positioned themselves slightly forward, as if to validate the gravity of what was about to be said. Margaret raised her gaze again, a glint of determination in her eyes. With a smile that blended elegance and triumph, she announced, "I am pleased to inform you that, as of today, I am the new owner of Le Mode." The hall fell into complete silence. Emily and Lisa's eyes widened, the surprise evident on their faces. "That's right," Margaret continued, looking directly at them. "I just acquired this store, and, as you can imagine, things are going to change around here." Margaret stood in the center of the hall, with all eyes fixed on her. Her expression, calm yet resolute, exuded the authority of a woman accustomed to leading. After announcing her acquisition of the store, she took a brief pause, allowing her words to settle in the tense air. Then, she turned her gaze directly to Emily and Lisa, who remained motionless among the other employees. The two, now pale and restless, seemed to be desperately searching for a way out of the situation. "Yesterday," Margaret began, her voice resonating through the hall, "I was treated shamefully in this store. I was judged by my appearance, by the simplicity of my clothing, and undoubtedly by the color of my skin." She took a step toward the two women, her gaze fixed and penetrating. "This kind of behavior, which disrespects the dignity of any person, has no place in my business. Not yesterday, not today, not ever." Emily, sensing that something more serious was about to unfold, tried to intervene. "Ms. Johnson, I think there was a misunderstanding," she began, her tone hesitant, as if searching for words that could soften the situation. Margaret elegantly raised her hand, but with a firmness that silenced her instantly. "No," Margaret said, without raising her voice, but with an authority that made Emily fall silent immediately. "You already said everything you needed yesterday, when you decided who I was without even knowing me. When you chose to laugh at me, ignore my presence, and make assumptions based on prejudices that have no place in our society, much less in the professional environment." Lisa, who had remained silent until that moment, also tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "Ms. Johnson, it wasn't my intention. I was just—" "Enough," Margaret interrupted, her tone hardening. "You both made a conscious choice. Yesterday, you chose to treat a customer with disrespect and prejudice. Today, that choice has consequences. As the owner of this store, I cannot and will not tolerate behaviors that shame the name of Le Mode or compromise the work environment I am here to build." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Margaret kept her gaze fixed on the two women for a moment before uttering the words that would seal their fate. "Emily, Lisa, you are both fired. You may collect your belongings and leave the premises immediately." The reaction was instantaneous. Emily stepped forward, her face red with indignation, and tried to argue again, now in a more agitated tone. "You can't do this. I've worked here for years. I've always done my best." "If that is your best," Margaret interrupted without hesitation, "then you truly do not belong in this place. Because my standard, the standard that now defines this store, is respect, excellence, and inclusion. And you have failed at all of them." Lisa looked like she was about to break down, but she didn't dare say anything more. Both women realized there was nothing they could do. Their careers at Le Mode had ended there, in front of all their colleagues who, although silent, seemed relieved to see justice being served. With the departure of Emily and Lisa, the atmosphere in the store felt lighter, although there was still a mix of tension and expectation in the air. The employees watched Margaret closely, unsure of what would come next, but confident that they were in the presence of someone who not only commanded with authority, but also with an unwavering sense of justice. Margaret, maintaining her elegant posture and the calm that always characterized her, then turned to Sophie, the young saleswoman who had shown respect and empathy from the very beginning. Sophie stood among the other employees, still surprised by the events and clearly trying to process everything she had just witnessed. When Margaret walked towards her, with a warm smile and a gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances, Sophie felt her heart race. She hadn't expected to be the center of attention at that moment. Margaret stopped in front of Sophie and looked at her sincerely. "Sophie," she began, her voice soft but full of meaning, "yesterday, when I entered this store, I was met with disdain and prejudice by some people. However, you demonstrated something that is essential for this type of business, and more importantly for life: respect, dignity, and empathy." Sophie blushed slightly, but maintained her composure, her eyes beginning to shine with the emotion that was starting to overflow. "I just did what I thought was right," she replied humbly. "I wanted you to find what you were looking for and feel good here." Margaret smiled even more, her eyes filled with admiration for the young woman. "And that is exactly what I expect from everyone who works in this store. You showed that you understand what it means to truly serve a customer, without judging them by their appearance, but seeing the person in front of you." Margaret paused, looking at the other employees as if she wanted each of them to engrave those words in their minds. "That is why, starting today, you will be the manager of this store." The hall fell silent for a moment as Sophie blinked, incredulous at what she had just heard. "Manager?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, as if she needed to confirm that she hadn't misunderstood. Margaret nodded firmly. "Yes, manager," Margaret repeated. "This store needs leadership that reflects the values I want to implement here. And you have shown that you have exactly what is necessary: the ability to treat all people with humanity and integrity. It is the kind of example that everyone here needs to follow." Sophie placed a hand on her chest, clearly emotional, as her eyes began to fill with tears. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I don't even know how to thank you. It's an honor, and I promise I will do my best to live up to your trust." Margaret placed her hand on Sophie's shoulder in an encouraging manner. "I know you will do an excellent job. I want this store to be a place where anyone who walks through those doors feels welcome, valued, and respected, regardless of how they are dressed or where they come from. And I know you will be the person to lead that transformation." The other employees, who had been watching in silence until then, began to clap timidly. The gesture soon turned into a warm round of applause that filled the hall. Sophie, still visibly emotional, smiled through her tears, feeling not only recognized, but also inspired to give her best in this new position. Margaret then took another step forward, now addressing everyone present. "From today on, Le Mode will be known not only for the quality of its products, but also for the respect with which we treat our customers and each other. I want each of you to remember that no matter who walks through that door, our job is to ensure they leave here feeling valued. That is how we will build something greater than just a clothing store. We will build a space of respect and inclusion." Sophie discreetly wiped her tears and lifted her chin, determined. She knew the responsibility would be great, but she was ready to face the challenge. Margaret smiled at her once more before giving one last look at the hall. "Now, let's begin this new era." The days that followed were marked by a sense of renewal and transformation within Le Mode. Margaret Johnson was not the type of leader who merely observed from a distance. She was present in every detail, personally overseeing both the physical restructuring of the store and the rebuilding of its team and values. Her vision was clear: to transform Le Mode into a space that reflected excellence, inclusion, and respect, a place where all customers were treated with the dignity they deserved. Margaret started with training, something she believed was essential for the cultural change she wanted to implement. In the following weeks, all employees participated in mandatory sessions that addressed empathy, diversity, and the importance of exceptional service. The training included practical simulations, group discussions, and lectures from experts. Margaret made a point to be present at some of these sessions, not only to ensure that the values were being absorbed, but also to share her own story and perspective. "When I started in the business world, I faced many looks like the ones I received here on my first visit," Margaret said during one of the lectures, her voice filled with emotion. "But I learned that respect and dignity start from within. Each of you has the power to transform someone's experience simply by choosing to treat them as you would like to be treated. This is the standard I expect from everyone here." Her words resonated deeply among the employees, many of whom began to see Margaret not just as a boss, but as an inspiration. Meanwhile, Sophie, now as manager, quickly demonstrated her competence and dedication. She organized the team efficiently, assigned tasks, and ensured that everyone was engaged in the transformation process. Sophie also implemented a continuous feedback system, encouraging employees to share ideas to improve the customer experience. Margaret was particularly impressed with Sophie's initiative to create a success stories board, where employees could record examples of service that made a difference for customers. At the same time, Margaret also directed her efforts to improve the physical structure of the store. She hired a renowned interior design team to modernize the space, ensuring that the store was as welcoming as it was sophisticated. The marble floor received a renewed polish. The mannequins were replaced with more inclusive models representing different body types and styles, and the fitting rooms were expanded and renovated, with accessible areas for people with reduced mobility. I want every detail of this store to tell customers. You are welcome here, Margaret explained to the architect in charge of the project. She also made sure to include a comfortable lounge area, with elegant armchairs and a small bar offering coffee, tea, and water for visitors. The shopping experience should be enjoyable for everyone, she stated. Another crucial aspect of the restructuring was the creation of a clear inclusion policy. Margaret drafted a code of conduct that was now posted in the employees' break room and also given to each new team member. The document emphasized values such as respect, empathy, and excellence, making it clear that any behavior that violated these principles would not be tolerated. During this period of change, Sophie stood out even more. She helped lead daily meetings with the team, reviewed each employee's progress in the training sessions, and encouraged collaboration among everyone. We are all learning together, she often said in an encouraging tone. Her ability to listen and motivate others created a more harmonious work environment, and employees began to realize that the new management was truly different. Margaret also made a point to reward the team's efforts. At the end of each week, she organized small celebrations in the main hall of the store where she publicly recognized employees who excelled in their roles. These celebrations not only reinforced the positive culture she was building, but also created a sense of unity among all. After a few intense weeks, Le Mode was almost unrecognizable, not only in appearance but in the energy that now permeated the place. Longtime customers began to notice the difference in service, often commenting on how they felt more welcomed and valued. New customers, attracted by the improvements in the space and the reputation for excellence, began to arrive in greater numbers. 1 month after the great transformation at Le Mode, Margaret Johnson decided to make a discreet visit to the store. Although she was confident in the work that Sophie and the team were doing, she wanted to see with her own eyes how the changes were being implemented. Dressed in understated elegance, as always, Margaret crossed Fifth Avenue towards the store, which was now much more than a business for her. It was a symbol of a new era. Upon entering, the sound of the bell above the door was familiar, but this time it was accompanied by something much more significant: a warm welcome. A young employee, with a genuine smile, immediately approached her. "Good morning, welcome to Le Mode. Can I help you with anything?" she asked, in a polite and welcoming tone that made Margaret smile internally. "Thank you, I'm just looking around," Margaret replied, walking through the hall with an attentive but satisfied gaze. The atmosphere was renewed, with an energy that was almost palpable. Customers from diverse backgrounds and styles wandered through the sections of the store, trying on clothes and chatting cheerfully with the staff. There was an elderly woman choosing a coat, a young couple analyzing a dress for a special event, and even a mother with a small child playing in the lounge area while she examined accessories. Margaret noticed that the employees were actively engaged, not just fulfilling their roles, but genuinely interested in the needs of the customers. One employee was helping the elderly woman adjust a coat in front of the mirror, while another patiently explained the customization options for a suit. Everything there seemed to flow naturally and harmoniously, just as Margaret had always dreamed. As she got closer to the counter, Margaret saw Sophie, impeccable in her posture and presence, confidently coordinating the team. She was giving gentle but clear instructions and seemed to be everywhere at once, ensuring that every detail was perfect. When Sophie spotted her, her eyes lit up, and she immediately went to meet Margaret. "Mrs. Johnson," Sophie exclaimed, with a smile that was both respectful and full of admiration. "It's so good to see you. I hope you are pleased with what we are building here." Margaret chuckled softly, looking at Sophie with a gaze that mixed pride and gratitude. "More than pleased, Sophie. I am impressed. You have truly embraced this opportunity and transformed this store into something that goes far beyond a simple sales space. The atmosphere here is incredible." Sophie blushed slightly, but maintained her smile. "I just did what you taught us. Your leadership and vision were the foundation of all this. We all draw inspiration from your story and what you represent." Margaret gently placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "You deserve a lot of credit, Sophie. You were the one who implemented the changes, guided the team, and made the customers feel valued. Remember, however, Margaret continued with a sparkle in her eyes, that true luxury is not in the labels, but in how we treat people. That is the essence of everything. Margaret's words seemed to resonate in Sophie's heart, who nodded, visibly moved. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I promise I will continue to honor these values every day. Margaret took one last look around, observing the interactions happening in the store. Every detail, from the inclusive mannequins to the smiles on the employees' faces, was a reminder of how much had been achieved in such a short time. La Mode was no longer just a luxury store. It was a place where everyone was treated with dignity and respect, a space where true value lay in the people. Before leaving, Margaret turned to Sophie once more. I am leaving the store in excellent hands, she said with conviction. Keep it up, and this store will be an example for the entire industry. With that, Margaret crossed the entrance door, the bell ringing behind her as a symbol of closure and, at the same time, a new beginning. As she walked down the bustling Fifth Avenue, she felt a wave of satisfaction. Not only had she transformed the environment of La Mode, but she had also impacted the lives of everyone who worked there and many who would cross those doors in the future. It was a sunny day, and Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the fresh morning air. In her heart, she knew her mission had been accomplished, and as she continued on her way, she carried with her the certainty that with respect, empathy, and determination, meaningful changes would always be possible.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to continue watching.